My name is Olivia Morgan, and if you've ever been told you don't belong, you know exactly how sharp that wound feels. It's not just a casual sting. It burrows into your skin and lingers in your chest, replaying itself when you least expect it. For me, that wound came wrapped inside a single sentence, one I will never forget. This table is for family. Find yourself another seat. Those words didn't just cut deep. They changed everything. It had been years since my family last gathered together like this. We weren't the type to share holidays with warmth or cheer. Not anymore. Over time, we had grown more like acquaintances connected by blood than people who cared for one another. So when my aunt suggested a grand dinner at one of the city's most lavish restaurants, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline. I knew what awaited me. The judgmental glances, the backhanded remarks, the subtle but deliberate reminders that I had never quite measured up. My cousins and siblings lived lives that aligned with the family's expectations. Corporate jobs, stable careers, impressive paychecks. I had chosen differently. I pursued art, a decision that gave me joy but never quite impressed them. To them, my choice was evidence that I lacked ambition, that I was wasting my potential. But another part of me hoped this time would be different. Thought maybe they've changed. Maybe I'll finally feel like I belong. That fragile hope was enough to make me say yes. The restaurant shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across polished floors, and soft piano music floated through the air. The maitre d' led me to the dining area, where a long table stretched across the center of the room. My family was already gathered, their voices carrying easily above the quiet hum of other guests. I paused, adjusting the strap of my dress as I scanned for a chair. There was space at the far end, one empty seat waiting. Relief flickered through me. But the moment I stepped closer, my cousin looked up. His smile faltered into something colder. "Oh, you're here," he said, his tone laced with annoyance. The others turned their heads almost in unison. My aunt's carefully painted smile froze in place, my uncle shifted uncomfortably, and my sister avoided my eyes altogether. Then came the sentence that crushed whatever fragile hope I'd carried with me. "This table is for family," my eldest cousin said, her voice sharp as glass. She gestured toward a smaller table tucked away near the wall. "You can sit over there." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout, "I am family whether you like it or not." But my throat tightened. My heart pounded against my ribs, and in that moment, it felt easier to comply than to fight. So I turned, walked toward the smaller table and sat down. As I adjusted the silverware in front of me, my hands trembled. Their laughter resumed, louder now, echoing in my ears. They weren't just excluding me from a chair. They were excluding me from belonging. It was the story of my life, replayed in front of an audience of strangers. I stared at the menu, its elegant script blurring before my eyes. Anger boiled beneath my skin, but so did something else, clarity. I realized that I had spent too many years swallowing my pride. Too many years letting their rejection define me. Tonight I didn't want to be silent. Tonight something inside me was ready to fight back. The waiter approached, his expression polite but curious. "Are you ready to order, miss?" I inhaled slowly, steadying my voice. "Yes. I'll take the lobster, the truffle pasta, the filet mignon, medium rare, and the chef's dessert sampler. Oh, and bring me your best bottle of wine." His pen hesitated briefly before scratching across his pad. He gave a respectful nod. "Excellent choice." Plates began arriving one by one, each more decadent than the last. The aromas filled the air around me, rich and indulgent. I savored each bite deliberately, my posture calm, my expression unreadable. At the main table I felt eyes on me. My cousins whispered to each other, glancing at the dishes piled high on my small table. Confusion flickered across their faces, But I ignored them. This wasn't about the food. It was about reclaiming something they had tried to take from me. My dignity. Hours passed, laughter still rolling from their table, though it now carried an edge of curiosity. Finally, the moment came. The waiter returned, holding a leather-bound folder. He set it down in front of me with a polite nod. But instead of waiting for my response, he turned and carried the bill straight to the long family table. I watched silently as he placed it before my eldest cousin. Her laughter froze mid-sentence. She blinked, staring at the numbers printed neatly on the page. My uncle leaned closer, his face reddening. My aunt gasped softly, pressing her hand to her chest. "Excuse me," my cousin said sharply. "There must be some mistake. We didn't order all of this." The waiter's voice remained calm, professional. "Actually, madam, all tables under the Morgan reservation are billed together. Everything is linked to the main party." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Their smugness evaporated, replaced by shock, frustration, and disbelief. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I leaned back in my chair, meeting their bewildered stares with quiet strength. That night, something shifted inside me. Revenge wasn't about causing them pain. It was about refusing to let them decide my worth. It was about standing tall despite years of being pushed down. The $2,200 bill was just the beginning. 'Cause what happened at that dinner table was going to unravel far more than they expected. The fallout from that night didn't end at the restaurant. When the family tried to shift blame, old wounds and buried secrets rose to the surface, forcing everyone, including me, to confront the truth about what family really meant. The night air was cold as I stepped out of the restaurant, the city lights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Even though the events inside had left my family speechless, I could still feel the heat of their humiliation lingering in the air behind me. For years I had imagined moments like this, moments where I could finally stand up, reclaim my dignity, but now that it had happened, it felt surreal, almost unreal. Walking to my car, I replayed the dinner in my head. The way my cousin's smug expression had faltered, the sudden silence that had filled the room, the way the waiter had handed them a reality check with nothing but a neatly printed bill. It had been satisfying, yes, but it was also only the beginning. I realized then that true change wouldn't come from one night. It would require careful planning, patience, and strategy. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of notifications on my phone. Messages from friends, some I hadn't spoken to in years, poured in, asking if I was okay. Most of them had heard about the dinner through the grapevine, and almost everyone's tone carried disbelief and a hint of admiration. It was strange to see people on my side, people who had never been involved in my family's internal politics but recognized the injustice I'd endured. Even so, I didn't feel like celebrating. I was proud of myself, yes, but this was more than just a personal victory. It was the start of something bigger, a revelation about who I was and what I was willing to fight for. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I made a mental list. The lies, the small betrayals, the years of exclusion and judgment. They thought they had controlled my story, but the power dynamic was shifting and I could feel it. By the third day, my family began to reach out. Messages came in waves. Casual checking-in texts, awkward phone calls from my cousins, and even a hesitant email from my aunt. They were trying to reclaim the narrative, to assert control over what they perceived as damage to their reputation. I read the messages carefully, savoring the power that came from my silence. Every call I ignored, every text I left unanswered, sent a stronger message than any argument I could have made. Their discomfort was a mirror reflecting their own insecurities, their own recognition that the hierarchy they had enforced for so long had finally been challenged. That week, I began noticing subtle shifts in their behavior. My cousin who had sneered at me during dinner started asking questions about my projects, inquiring casually about the art I had been creating. My sister, who had always dismissed my career choices, mentioned a gallery she had visited recently, almost as if she were trying to find common ground. I smiled inwardly at these gestures. They were small, tentative, but they indicated that the shock of the dinner was forcing them to reevaluate me. I realized that my revenge wasn't just a singular act. It was a statement of self-respect, a demonstration that I would no longer tolerate being sidelined. It wasn't about money, although the $2,200 bill had delivered a dramatic punch. It was about authority, control, and dignity. I had taken back a piece of myself that they had tried to diminish. As the days passed, I noticed another unexpected consequence. Extended family members who had always been neutral, distant, or even subtly critical started reaching out to me. Invitations to casual gatherings, requests for collaboration on projects, and even phone calls from relatives who had been absent from my life for years began to trickle in. Some were genuine, some were cautious, but all of them acknowledged in one way or another that I mattered. I began to understand that the exclusion I had endured wasn't just a personal issue. It was symptomatic of a larger pattern within the family. For decades, power, status, and appearances had dictated inclusion, while individuality and choice were punished. By asserting myself at that dinner table, I had inadvertently challenged that system, and the ripples were beginning to spread. The turning point came unexpectedly. My aunt called one evening, her voice tight, almost fragile. "Olivia," she said, using my full name for the first time in years. "Can we talk?" I paused before responding. I could hear the tension in her voice, the weight of years of unspoken grievances, pride, and denial. "Yes," I said finally. "We can talk. But it has to be honest." Over the next hour, she confessed things I hadn't anticipated. The favoritism, the unspoken alliances, the assumptions that had dictated how each family member was treated. She admitted, almost reluctantly, that they had underestimated me, dismissed my choices, and assumed I would never claim my own power. Listening to her, I felt a mix of relief and validation. Finally, someone in the family was acknowledging the truth. But I also realized that acknowledgement alone wasn't enough. Words were meaningless without action, and I had learned that the only way to command respect was to maintain boundaries, enforce my worth, and continue to live authentically. By the end of the week, I had a clearer vision. This wasn't just about a single family dinner. It was about reshaping my relationship with the people who had defined me for so long. I would continue to engage with them, but on my terms, with my dignity intact. The $2,200 bill had been symbolic, yes, but the real lesson was far deeper. Power, respect, and self-worth are earned through courage and self-assertion, not blind conformity. And so, with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, I began preparing for the next family gathering. This time I would be ready, not just to confront them but to transform the dynamic entirely. Little did I know, the dinner was only the beginning. As my family scrambled to reassess their assumptions, deeper secrets and long-held resentments began to surface. Secrets that would test loyalties, challenge perceptions, and change the meaning of family forever. The weeks after that unforgettable dinner were nothing short of a revelation. What I had once considered a simple family gathering turned into a cascade of truths that I hadn't anticipated. My name, Olivia Morgan, had become a silent echo in conversations across the family, a reminder that I wasn't the powerless outsider they had assumed I was. But with recognition came complications, and sometimes, the deeper the revelation, the heavier the consequences. It began with a phone call from my cousin, Claire. She had always been one of the quieter ones, the observer rather than the instigator. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Olivia, can we meet? There's something you need to know," she said, hesitation layering every word. I agreed, curiosity mixed with caution. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, a neutral ground where no one's assumptions could dominate the conversation. Claire's eyes were downcast as she sipped her coffee. After a moment, she looked up, meeting my gaze with a gravity that made my stomach tighten. "There's more going on than you realize," she began. "It's not just about the table or the bill, or even about who belongs where. There are things our parents have kept hidden for years. Things that affect all of us." Her words made my pulse quicken. I had sensed undercurrents of secrecy in the family, small comments left unspoken, glances that carried silent judgments, but I hadn't expected this level of revelation. Over the next hour, Claire unfolded a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true. Our parents, she revealed, had long made decisions based on appearances, alliances, and financial convenience. Entire aspects of our upbringing had been influenced not by love, but by strategy, inheritance, expectations, and even who was allowed to pursue passions were dictated by unspoken rules. I felt a mixture of anger and clarity. The injustice I had experienced wasn't isolated. It was systematic. My exclusion from the table wasn't a personal slight alone. It was part of a long-standing pattern designed to control, suppress, and manipulate. By the time we parted ways, I had a plan. The revelation wasn't a weapon to use against them in anger. It was an opportunity to change the narrative, to confront the pattern with intelligence, patience, and dignity. I needed to show them that exclusion no longer held power over me. The next family gathering arrived sooner than expected. Invitations, which had previously been perfunctory, now carried an undercurrent of anxiety. They were wary of me, aware that I had shifted the dynamic. I noticed the small, careful gestures of diplomacy as I entered the room. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes, measured conversations, and subtle attempts to involve me without openly acknowledging my autonomy. I allowed them their illusions for the moment. My goal wasn't to humiliate. My goal was to reclaim respect, assert boundaries, and demonstrate that I could navigate the complex terrain of family politics with grace. As the evening unfolded, a tense undercurrent persisted. Dinner conversations were polite, restrained, and at times awkward. But beneath the surface, I could sense the unease, the silent acknowledgement that the rules had changed. Then came the revelation no one expected. An old family secret surfaced during a casual conversation. My uncle, unaware of my insight, casually mentioned a trust fund set aside for the successors in the family. Funds that had been explicitly denied to me because of their assumptions about my career and lifestyle. The room froze. The adults exchanged uneasy glances. I kept my composure, listening quietly as the story emerged. The fund had been substantial, capable of altering the trajectory of anyone's life. And now the truth was clear. I had been systematically excluded not because of incompetence, but because of prejudice. In that moment I realized that true power comes not from money alone, but from understanding and strategy. I didn't react impulsively. I didn't accuse or shout. Instead, I allowed the knowledge to settle, the impact to reverberate silently through the room. They could feel it, the weight of what they had done, the years of oversight and judgment. And finally, I understood that patience could be more powerful than immediate confrontation. Over the following days, subtle changes began to appear. Conversations that had once been dismissive now contained genuine curiosity about my work, my choices, and my life. Family members who had avoided me now sought my perspective on matters that had previously been off-limits. The balance of respect was slowly shifting, though no one would admit it outright. Yet, despite these victories, I knew the journey wasn't complete. The family's recognition of their past misjudgments was just the first step. True reconciliation would require continuous demonstration of self-worth, strategic engagement, and unwavering confidence. I had learned that sometimes silence and observation were as important as action. By choosing when to speak and when to act, I could assert influence without aggression, subtly guiding the family to acknowledge my rightful place. By the end of the week, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The dinner, the bill, and the subsequent revelations had transformed me. I had discovered not only the depth of the family's hidden patterns, but also the strength within myself to navigate and alter them. It wasn't just about being included, it was about asserting my value on my terms. And as I prepared for the next challenge, I realized that the story of the $2,200 bill was more than just a tale of revenge. It was a lesson in dignity, strategy, and the quiet power of resilience. The secrets unveiled at that dinner would set the stage for confrontations, alliances, and revelations that no one in the family saw coming. As loyalties were tested, the real meaning of belonging and betrayal would emerge in ways that challenged everything Olivia thought she knew. The air was thick with anticipation as the next family gathering approached. By now, the dynamics had shifted considerably. My name, Olivia Morgan, no longer carried the weight of exclusion. It carried an unspoken authority. But with authority came scrutiny. And with scrutiny came the delicate task of navigating a web of loyalties that had been tested for decades. I arrived early, as always, wanting to observe before engaging. The venue was our usual choice for family events. A private room in a well-known restaurant, adorned with warm lighting and heavy curtains that insulated us from the bustling world outside. Inside, I could see the subtle signs of tension. My cousins exchanged furtive glances, my aunt's hands trembled slightly as she arranged the napkins, and my uncle's usual posture of dominance seemed a little less assured. As I took my seat, I reflected on the lessons of the past months. The $2,200 dinner had been more than a display of personal vindication. It had exposed the fractures in our family, brought hidden hierarchies to light, and forced each member to reconsider their assumptions about me. But it was also a reminder that change would not come overnight. Trust, respect, and recognition had to be earned continuously. The conversation began cautiously. Small talk, polite inquiries about work and hobbies, questions about projects I was pursuing. At first, the tone was tentative, as if they were testing the waters. But I recognized this as an opportunity. My responses were measured, thoughtful, and confident, subtly reinforcing my competence and individuality without overt confrontation. It wasn't long before old patterns began to surface. My cousin Daniel, who had once openly belittled my career choices, tried to assert his authority over the discussion, interrupting and dismissing my input. But this time I didn't shrink. I waited for the right moment, then calmly presented my ideas with clarity and confidence. The shift in the room was palpable. My words were no longer background noise. They demanded attention. Halfway through the evening, the tension escalated in an unexpected way. A heated discussion arose regarding the family's business investments, a topic that had previously been my uncle's exclusive domain. He made a pointed remark about tradition and how things had always been done, implicitly excluding me from any meaningful input. I paused, taking a slow sip of water before responding. My tone was calm but firm. Tradition is important, yes, I said, but so is progress. If we continue to rely solely on the old ways without considering new perspectives, we risk stagnation. The room fell silent. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, and for a moment, it felt as if time had slowed. I could see the internal struggle on their faces, between maintaining old hierarchies and acknowledging the validity of my voice. It was a test, not just of my patience but of their willingness to adapt. Then came the subtle but unmistakable signs of alliance shifts. My cousin Claire, who had always been a quiet observer, nodded in agreement with my suggestions, signaling her support. Another cousin, Margaret, glanced at me with what I interpreted as acknowledgement of my growing authority within the family. Even my uncle, though visibly reluctant, seemed to reconsider some of his long-held positions. It became evident that the $2,200 dinner and subsequent revelations had set off a domino effect. Loyalties were being redefined. The family was no longer a static entity dictated solely by tradition and hierarchy. It was evolving, and I had become a catalyst for that change. By the end of the evening, I realized that this was the true challenge of family dynamics. Navigating loyalties while asserting one's own position. It wasn't enough to win a single battle. Long-term respect required consistency, strategy, and emotional intelligence. I had to maintain balance, asserting my value without alienating those who might be allies in disguise, recognizing potential threats without overreacting, and guiding conversations toward constructive outcomes rather than destructive confrontations. As we parted ways that night, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and vigilance. The balance of power had shifted, but the journey was far from over. Hidden tensions, unspoken grievances, and long-standing expectations remained, waiting to test me further. Yet I also felt a growing confidence, an understanding that I could navigate these complexities while remaining true to myself and my principles. The following weeks brought new opportunities to observe and influence. Small interactions, casual conversations over lunch, brief emails regarding family decisions, and even social media exchanges, became arenas in which loyalty, respect, and influence were subtly negotiated. I discovered that patience and observation were often more powerful than immediate confrontation, and that true authority came not from domination, but from the ability to command respect through consistent, measured actions. Through these experiences, I also began to understand the importance of empathy. Many of my family members were grappling with their own insecurities, fears, and expectations. Recognizing their struggles didn't mean compromising my boundaries. Rather, it allowed me to approach conflicts with a strategic understanding, turning potential adversaries into collaborators. By the time the month ended, the family dynamic had transformed in ways that were almost imperceptible to outsiders but deeply significant to those involved. My voice, once dismissed and ignored, was now acknowledged and even sought after. The power of exclusion had diminished, replaced by the influence that comes from self-assured presence and thoughtful action. Yet, despite these victories, I knew the journey was not complete. Challenges, betrayals, and unforeseen obstacles still awaited. But I felt ready. Stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. I understood that true change required patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment to one's principles. As loyalties shifted and hidden agendas emerged, Olivia would face her most challenging test yet. An unexpected betrayal that would force her to redefine her strategy, confront the family's deepest secrets, and prove once and for all that respect and recognition cannot be demanded, only earned. The calm that had settled over the family after the shifting loyalties of the last few weeks was deceptive. As Olivia Morgan, I had learned that patience, strategy, and careful observation were my greatest allies. Yet even the most carefully laid plans can be disrupted by an unexpected betrayal. And that night, I discovered just how fragile trust could be within a family bound by old hierarchies and hidden agendas. It began innocently enough. My cousin Daniel, who had once mocked my career choices, approached me with a tentative smile. "Olivia," he said, "I wanted to share some information with you. I think it could help with your art project and even influence the upcoming gallery show." At first I felt a flicker of hope. Was this an olive branch, a gesture of reconciliation, or genuine interest? Over the years, I had learned to read between the lines, to distinguish between sincerity and pretense. But sometimes, the heart hopes even when the mind hesitates. He handed me a small folder with sketches, notes, and financial projections, things that could indeed boost my project. But there was something in the way he hesitated, something in the subtle glance he cast over his shoulder toward the rest of the family, that triggered a warning in me. I took the folder, nodding politely. "Thank you, Daniel. I'll take a careful look." For the next few days, I reviewed the materials. On the surface, they seemed valuable. They contained market analysis, potential gallery connections, and even insider tips about upcoming exhibitions. But as I examined them closely, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Details that didn't add up, contradictions that raised questions. It became clear that Daniel's offer was not the generous assistance it appeared to be. He had set a trap. The betrayal hit me in layers. On one hand, it was personal. Someone I had begun to tentatively trust was trying to manipulate me. On the other hand, it was a test, a reflection of the family's entrenched habit of using secrecy, strategy, and deception to maintain control. For years, I had navigated around these patterns. Now, I had to confront them head-on. I decided to act carefully. I wouldn't react impulsively or confront Daniel in front of the family, where his embarrassment or denial could weaken my position. Instead, I devised a plan that required patience, subtlety, and precision, the kind of strategy that would turn his betrayal into an opportunity to assert my authority once and for all. That evening, during a casual family dinner, I brought up the project Daniel had shared with me. I spoke about it in a measured tone, expressing cautious interest and highlighting aspects of the materials that were genuinely useful, while subtly pointing out inconsistencies and contradictions. My observations were precise, thoughtful, and unassailable. The family listened, intrigued and silent. Daniel's confident posture faltered. The smirk he had carried for weeks vanished. He had expected compliance or at least confusion. Instead, he faced exposure, and the room felt the shift in power immediately. By the end of the evening, Daniel understood, silently without confrontation, that his attempt at manipulation had failed. But the broader lesson was clear to everyone present. Olivia Morgan was no longer someone to be underestimated, overlooked, or manipulated. My patience, intelligence, and composure had turned a potential setback into a defining moment of authority. The betrayal also strengthened other alliances. Cousin Claire, who had previously been an observer, now approached me with a mixture of admiration and trust. Even those family members who had been neutral or skeptical began to see the value of honesty, integrity, and mutual respect in dealings with me. I realized that betrayal, when confronted strategically, can become a tool for transformation rather than destruction. Over the next few days, I reflected on the incident. Betrayal is painful, but it also provides clarity. It reveals hidden intentions, uncovers weak spots in strategy, and exposes character in ways that honesty alone cannot. By responding with intelligence, patience, and composure, I had not only neutralized Daniel's attempt to manipulate me but had also elevated my position within the family. I began documenting everything: interactions, observations, patterns, and outcomes. This wasn't about keeping score. It was about understanding dynamics, anticipating challenges, and being prepared for any future attempts to undermine me. Knowledge, I realized, was a form of power that could not be stolen or compromised. The final twist of the betrayal came unexpectedly. Daniel, attempting to salvage his reputation, tried to speak privately to my uncle and aunt, framing me as overly sensitive or misunderstanding the situation. But because I had been careful, because I had maintained records and clarity of action, my family recognized the truth. The attempt to undermine me backfired spectacularly, reinforcing the respect I had earned through patience and insight. For the first time in years, the family's hierarchy seemed not just challenged, but transformed. Power was no longer inherited, assumed, or based on appearances. It was earned through competence, dignity, and strategic action. And I, Olivia Morgan, had proven that exclusion, betrayal, and manipulation could not define me. That night, as I returned home, I reflected on the journey so far. The $2,200 dinner, the shifting loyalties, the unveiling of secrets, and the confrontation with betrayal, all of it had led to this point, a position of authority grounded in respect, clarity, and self-worth. Yet I knew the journey wasn't complete. True reconciliation, understanding, and lasting influence required continued vigilance, patience, and wisdom. But for the first time I felt a sense of mastery, not over others but over my own responses, my own principles, and my own sense of identity. The final confrontation was coming. Long-held secrets, unresolved tensions, and the ultimate test of respect and loyalty would bring Olivia face-to-face with her family's deepest truths, and force a decision that would define her legacy within the family forever. By the time the next family gathering arrived, everything had changed. The subtle shifts, quiet victories, and strategic moves of the past months had set the stage for a reckoning that would define not only my place in the family but also the meaning of respect, trust, and belonging. I, Olivia Morgan, had grown in ways I hadn't anticipated. Stronger, wiser, and more resolute. But the final chapter of this journey would test every lesson I had learned. The venue was the same private dining room we had used for previous gatherings, yet it felt charged with an intensity one hadn't experienced before. There was a quiet tension in the air, a collective awareness that something important was about to unfold. My family, now keenly conscious of the changes in dynamics, greeted me with cautious politeness, their smiles layered with both curiosity and apprehension. I arrived early, as was my habit, and took my seat strategically. From there, I could observe every interaction, every nuance, every flicker of expression. Months of preparation had taught me the importance of awareness, of seeing beneath the surface to the true motivations of those around me. The evening began with polite conversation, a facade of normalcy. But the undercurrents were unmistakable. My cousin Daniel, humbled after his earlier attempt at manipulation, kept his distance, avoiding direct eye contact. Others, who had previously dismissed or underestimated me, now subtly sought my opinion on matters ranging from family decisions to personal projects. I answered with measured confidence, offering insight without arrogance, asserting influence without domination. Then the moment arrived. My uncle, patriarch of the family and the one whose judgment had long held sway, leaned forward and spoke with unexpected gravity. "Olivia," he said, "we've witnessed how much has changed over the past months. You've demonstrated patience, intelligence, and integrity. Perhaps we have been too hasty in our judgments." I listened quietly, allowing the weight of his words to settle. This wasn't a concession made lightly. It was an acknowledgement of the truth I had shown through action rather than argument. As the conversation deepened, other family members shared their reflections. My aunt admitted that favoritism and assumptions had clouded her perception, and even my siblings confessed moments of regret over their own dismissals. There were moments of tension, pauses where silence spoke louder than words, but through it all I maintained calm. I had learned that authority is reinforced not by dominating others but by embodying principles and acting consistently with integrity. Then came the most critical moment, the discussion of a major family decision that had long been a source of division. Traditionally, this was a domain reserved for a select few, those deemed worthy by tradition and status. But now I was invited to contribute, to influence, and to guide the decision-making process. I spoke thoughtfully, balancing assertiveness with empathy, ensuring that each voice was heard while guiding the outcome toward fairness and progress. The room responded with a mixture of respect and surprise. I realized that this moment, the culmination of months of patience, strategy, and careful action, was not about revenge in the simplistic sense. It was about transformation. Transforming how I was perceived, how power was distributed, and how respect was earned. Later, as the evening wound down, I found a quiet moment alone with my cousin Claire, who had been my silent ally throughout this journey. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure yet also understanding that this was only the beginning of a new dynamic. "It wasn't just about me," I replied. "It was about fairness, respect, and redefining what family should mean." Walking home that night, I reflected on the journey. From being excluded from a single table to confronting betrayal, navigating shifting loyalties, and ultimately redefining the family's perception of me, I realized that true empowerment comes from within. The $2,200 bill at that first dinner had been symbolic, a catalyst, but the real victory was the transformation of relationships, the assertion of dignity, and the unwavering commitment to self-worth. I also understood that forgiveness, empathy, and patience were as powerful as strategy and assertiveness. By balancing these qualities, I had achieved not only recognition but genuine respect, something far more enduring than momentary revenge or superficial victory. The final lesson was clear. Exclusion and manipulation can wound, but they cannot define you. Authority and respect are earned through consistent action, courage, and integrity. Betrayal can be turned into insight, and conflict into growth. And in the end, family is not merely about blood or tradition. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and the ability to see each other as whole, valuable individuals. As I closed the door behind me that night, a sense of peace settled in my chest. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably grounded in my own worth. The table at which I had once been excluded was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of standing firmly in your truth. Olivia Morgan's story reminds us that true belonging isn't given. It's earned through dignity, strategic action, and unwavering self-respect. Challenges, betrayals, and exclusions may test us, but how we respond defines not only our position within our families and communities but also the depth of our character.